Welcome back to episode 2 of our new player's guide through timelines. I'm Automaton 2000 of BigBook.app.
I'm Danjevin of CabTools.app.
And I'm from Iowa. I only work in outer space. Big McLarge huge. Who writes this stuff?
Last time we talked about all the major currencies in the game, so go ahead and check out episode 1 if you like. Today is all about the collectible characters and timelines known as crew. Now, it can take a while to wrap your head around which crew are considered good and which might be bad enough that you even want to airlock them for honor. I'm looking at you, Wesley Crusher. Before we begin, please understand how painful it is for nerds like us to try to keep this conversation to under an hour, but we're going to do our best. If you're looking for an experienced and more detailed overview of how good a specific crew is, you can check them out on our websites, bigbook.app and cabtools.app. But it is important for you to learn for yourself what makes crew good, so you can make your own decisions, and in case one day we die and no one thinks to turn us into a Scottish candle. Let's begin with cadets. By cadets, I mean the gray, green, and blue level crew that you pick up early on in the game. These will usually be the first crew you level up to 100 and immortalize them, and they are necessary for cadet missions. That's a set of daily away missions, all 7 days of the week, and they have a special rewards table. And guys, is it as simple as just leveling your female Starfleet alien cadets to make sure you have eligible crew for all 7 days of the week? Big, talk to us about cadets a little bit.
Okay, so in some ways, I think in the end it will be that simple, that the female Starfleet alien cadets are going to be what you want long term, and it'll get you the most bang for the buck as far as, clearing nodes, especially in the weekday and weekend cadet missions, which is something that's going to be a part of your timeline's journey for the rest of the game. You will be doing cadet missions every day. It's just part of what you do. But you are at the mercy of the crew that you get early on. Randomness is just a big part of this game, so you might as well get used to it. So you have to choose from the crew that you are given at the beginning. But, use the tools that are available to you. Use the big book. Use data core to determine what crew can satisfy the most nodes and most game modes early on, because trainers are scarce, resources are scarce, especially for an early player. So finding that one or two crew that will do the most for you the earliest is going to be your best recipe for success. And that's probably going to be your uncommon, your green crew, if you have them and if they can satisfy enough nodes. Because gray crew, the 1-star common crew, they're really not going to do that much for you unless you just have no other options for something. So I would try and concentrate on 1 or 2 green crew that can get through several away team nodes, cadet nodes. Focus on those and get them up to level 100. And if you can get the 2nd star, even better, as fast as you can. Because the worst thing I think you can do early on is try and have a bunch of level 10, level 20, level 30 crew and not have them be useful at any usable power, and you're just kind of spinning your wheels and burning resources when you could be focusing things and get more done faster. That would be my advice.
Before we move on to Voyages, I'd also say, as sort of the introduction to the game, don't be afraid to airlock these low-rarity crew. They come back frequently, whereas legendaries you might not see a particular one for years in between. But let's go ahead and talk about super rare and legendary crew, starting with Voyages. Voyages are arguably the most rewarding system in timelines, and establishing a roster early on to excel there is going to help you build up your chronoton and item stockpiles, which is essential to leveling crew and competing in events. Now, Voyages are lucrative enough that a lot of veteran players base the decision of whether or not to obtain a new crew solely on how well they perform in Voyages. Now, as a new player, you're not going to have that luxury, but it's clear that this part of the game will continue to be important no matter how long you play. Dan, talk to me about what makes a crew considered good for Voyages.
Well, I'll start with a term that gets thrown around a lot by elder players. We call them later losers. This refers to the staying power you get with a crew that has a really high overall voyage power.
I'm sorry.
That
Do
is,
you call the elderly players later losers or the crew with big power?
that's for the listener to decide.
Okay.
So their voyage power is their total printed stats, but also there's a little bit added for their traits, which we'll get into a little bit later. But we call the crew the later losers as a way to describe how future-proof they are. So if you invest in the highest power crew, that investment will pay off in long-term playability even as new crew are printed. So a good way to look at this is a crew's V rank, their voyage rank relative to all other crew. I could get into specifics like voyage power, boosted, unboosted, but BigBook.app and CabTools.app do a good job of boiling all of this math down to a simple rank. The higher the rank, the more future-proof you'll find your crew are. And generally, anybody in the top 20 are your most solid investments. So, while raw power does matter, the way that voyages are scored means that some of these losers are still going to be frequent flyers if they have rare skill sets. Skill sets being things like Command Dip Sec, Command Dip Psi, those are the most common ones we see. So by Command Dip Sec, I mean command, diplomacy, and security skills. These particular common skill sets often come as free drops from your objective. Sometimes the month-long endurance objective events, also mega events, tend to drop these. But also some of the strongest crew in the game are Command Dip Sec, Command Dip Psi. You'll see them among the top 20 Voyagers. It's important to have enough of these. You've got to fill your Voyages and also your Shuttles, which commonly rely on those skills. But after a certain point, they're going to start competing with each other for those seats. The crew left on the sidelines or in your freezer are just kind of dead weight. So the volume and frequency of new crew that are printed into these skill sets are going to give you pause before you put heavy investment into anything but the strongest crew. One more footnote about skill order. When we generally talk about Command Dip Sec and such, the skills can be interchangeable. But the largest skill, the primary, makes a world of difference. Let's talk about one example of Lieutenant Ogawa. Relatively speaking, underpowered in terms of V rank. She has Command and Sec as two of her skills, but her primary is Med, and that makes her an important Voyager as a result. It's a good time to touch on the idea of value over replacement here also. So Ogawa's value over the next best crew in her skill order, the Warship EMA, is over 100 Voyage ranks. However, prior to her introduction about a year ago, Warship EMA was a high priority crew for years. It was common in retrieve advice and site advice. He had no other legendary peers in his skill order. So despite his lower V rank, his lower voyage score, because with crowded skill sets like Command Dip Sec, you're not going to see the same kind of long-term value as you do with those really rare skill sets because the replacements are so common. One final note on traits. When you're matching traits for your voyage seats, you're actually going to get an antimatter boost. So trait-rich crew are going to be better for those seats in some cases. Those tend to add anywhere between 80 and 200 points to the voyage score, but usually on the lower end of that. I think common advice is that each voyage trait match will add about 100 power. Also, hashtag follow the traits. They also carry over to other game systems. Trait-rich crew are a better investment now than ever, with collections, boss battles, and upcoming new features to consider.
Now, Big, would you say top Voyagers are worth retrieving, keeping in mind that you need all 5 stars on them? Voyages are lucrative, sure, but 1 star on a great Gauntlet or Arena crew, which usually just rely more on that first star, maybe they would be better investments for new rosters.
Yeah, I would say that early on, your first few retrievals, you're probably going to get more bang for your buck, as you said, with Gauntlet crew, because it just takes that 1 star to unlock their full potential, assuming that you can level them up reasonably quickly. I still think the top Voyagers are going to be worth retrieving, especially crew in that later losers power level, just because you will have the time to add additional stars through crew retrieval, and those crew will still be just about as powerful as they were when you retrieve that first star, that you won't grow out of those crew very quickly. So I would say Gauntlet first, at least a couple, but then work on filling out your Voyages.
All right, off the back of retrieval, let's go ahead and talk about Gauntlet. This part of the game uses just your crew's proficiency stats, meaning the ones in parentheses next to their larger base stat. Now, the proficiency doesn't change with fusion level, which is why it's one of the easier game systems to address with crew retrieval. You just need that first star. Some of the more salty Elder players might say you should just flip a coin in Gauntlet and move on, but there is at least some level of strategy involved. And it is, as a new player, it's definitely one of the harder systems to break into. It's player versus player. You have other players with big global stat boosts from collections and such. Now, there is a disclaimer here. If you've just started the game, it often takes weeks, usually months, to start breaking into the top 50, say, ranks of Gauntlet. And for the first few weeks, you can expect to win maybe only 1 or 2 matchups per Gauntlet. So you will need crew specifically made for Gauntlet. Not talking about Mitchell. Big proficiency rolls, basically, if you want to succeed. So, Big, talk to me about what players need to be watching out for their potential Gauntlet, either Behold pickups or with crew retrieval.
It's all about the proficiency rolls. And no other aspect of the crew matters for Gauntlet. It's just the rolls. So crew that have one big roll can kind of get you started, but what you really want are crew that have 2 and ideally 3 usable rolls in 3 different skills, because you have to use 2 skills for each pairing, each matchup. So just one big roll is probably not going to get you very far. So what would be best for you as an early game player is to target the skills that aren't necessarily covered by Gauntlet exclusives, because really Gauntlet exclusives are going to be how you succeed long term in Gauntlet. And up until that point, you're looking at stopgap options. But there is one big exception, and that's medicine, because there hasn't been a med primary Gauntlet exclusive yet. So that's a place where you can target, focus, and still compete. Crew like Defensive Phlox or Ari Ben Bem. Those are ways that you can get your foot in the door with Gauntlet, and then hopefully build up some streaks and wait for some of those exclusives to drop in, and then start filling out your roster and have things covered all across the board.
Yeah, exclusives have historically and increasingly been very, very strong, to the point that in certain skill pairs there are no other options. Dan, how would you advise a new player to try to compete with them? Can you compete with them, or should you just be retrieving the best crew you can and waiting for them to drop?
Yeah, the Gauntlet exclusives are strong. They're unbeatable in certain pairings. There's not much you can do. In fact, often when you're playing in the Gauntlet, there's a complaint I see frequently where people see walls of Locutus or walls of Balok or walls of Tribbled Koloth and Korax, and all of these exclusives will be staring you down, and you're sitting there with suboptimal crew. But that's not always going to be the case. And if you choose your battles, and especially if you are patient and really use the law of large numbers to get in every single Gauntlet round you can, make sure you enroll for the Gauntlets on time, and eventually you are going to find yourself in situations where you're going to get those 3 streaks, and where the crew that Big had mentioned, your Gary Sevens and your Defensive Phloxes, are going to get their licks in, and they're going to find not only a good Gauntlet that you can compete in, but also just great matchups that just kind of happen over time.
All right, let's move off the coin flipping part of the game and instead talk about ships. Arena, fleet boss battles, and skirmish, which are all kind of interlinked. Now, the ship ability of a crew, meaning something like hull repair or instant damage, the ability does not change with fusing additional copies, but their boost, meaning attack, evasion, or accuracy, the red, blue, or orange number, that does change with fusion level. Now, crew with certain abilities, especially the 2 I just mentioned, instant damage and hull repair, are coveted in fleet boss battles, while something like instant damage reigns supreme in every game mode. So if you can find a crew who's also useful elsewhere, they start to become a more prime retrieval target, someone like Fury Kess, who has instant ship damage and reasonable proficiencies for Gauntlet in the early game. On the boost side of things, that red, blue, or orange number, a strong attack boost generally makes the biggest difference in most cases. So you want to look for a +8, +9, or +10 attack boost if you can get your hands on it. That's not necessarily easy in the early game where it requires fusion, but sometimes you can find that on a super rare crew, which will come in at a lower opportunity cost. Now, Dan, I know your predecessor over in the Cab fleet, A Traveling Man, has put a lot of emphasis on fleet boss battles. You get a lot of honor, merits, credits from there, but it can be hard to break in too early on. So leaving trait matching aside for the minute, just talking about ship abilities and boosts in all three phases, arena, fleet boss battles, and skirmish events, how big of an emphasis do you put on acquiring the right crew for these game modes?
That's simple. Top priority, but only for the best of the best. With crew selection, you really want to focus on what offers you the longest term value for your investment. Optimal ship battle crew have been one of the most stable investments you can make because unlike Voyage and Gauntlet, which are prone to power creep because of stat inflation, the optimal ship battle crew abilities have been at their cap for years. Ship battle crew have always been relevant for Arena to earn some free schematics. Lately, they've gotten a huge push in just the past year. Objective events have ship battle requirements. The Unleashed event, you have to win 18 arena fights. Boss battles are also extremely rewarding and use a lot of the same crew, but the single best reason to really invest in strong ship battle crew has been around since 2018. That's the Skirmish event. So we'll discuss weekly events later on in a different chat, but we'll dive deeper and get a little more idea of the risk and reward with Skirmish. But since we only see one a month, you may be tempted to neglect your ship battle loadout. Resist that temptation, because in just those few days of competition, they can be rewarding enough to justify your investment completely. Otto, you touched upon a few types of abilities that we see frequently. I'll go on to talk about a few of those specific types. One term that you'll see thrown around is the hammer. That's what we call a crew that does big chunks of burst damage. Those hammer crew, with the introduction back in 2018, have really hit their cap at 400% damage on a 6-second no strings attached activation. So we've seen a little bit of improvement with newer crew whose hammer doesn't have an activation limit. They can keep firing and firing. But we really didn't see that to be relevant until fleet boss battles, when we were going for 3-minute long battles. Before then, ship battles were just, if they went 6 or even 8 seconds, that seemed like a long time. Another class of crew that you may want to focus on are optimal hull repair crew. You can call them your healers. They're another group to keep an eye on. They're not broadly used in other areas of the game, but in fleet boss battle, in order to last that entire duration of the battle, you're going to need to heal up your ship. And so we see a lot of use out of 25% hull repair crew. And we received our first optimal one back in 2019. The optimal hull repair crew trigger every 20 seconds on a cycle, and they give you those huge burst heals. We've had a few upgrades to those hull repair crews since then, but the healing strength in that 20-second cycle remains unbeaten. Both of these classes of crew are really pretty future-proof, especially because the game is balanced around the maximum damage and maximum healing that we have currently. I don't see them messing with the equations a whole lot. Otto, you also mentioned attack boost crew. There have always been good choices based on your ship and tactics to increase your raw DPS for long stretches of the battle. These have been a little more difficult to find. Some are unretrievable, some are non-portal, but there are some options. Good choices are ones that have high crit bonus. Those will work at your very first star, so they're great to get started quickly. You can also invest in plus attack crew, that red number. You'll need to fully fuse those, though, to be at their best, because each extra star you get on your crew increases that attack number by 1. I like a great free option in Demo Man Scotty. You get 3 copies of him from your earlier bridge levels. Your first 10 bridge levels drop him. He does both of those, plus attack and plus crit bonus. I'll harp a little more on longevity of these crew. Well, you can still see some incremental upgrades that give you a little bit more damage or some sort of advantage over the older versions. I think just because the game has been so stable for a while based on the power level of the hammers and the hull repair crew that we already have, I don't expect them to be making any quantum leaps with upgrades to these crew types. Maybe with a new fleet boss battle, if they ever did release the next one beyond the Doomsday Machine, then they may rebalance at that point. But if that ever happens.
All right, Big, I want to ask you about how you consider acquiring these crew, how many you might need. Obviously, in a game system like Voyages, you run out a dozen crew at once with different skill sets. Sometimes you might have 30 or 40 in the rotation that you use once or twice a week. Now, on ships, you're limited to just 4 at a time. And between the game modes we've discussed, arena boss battles, etc., there's a lot of overlap there, especially in instant damage. So how, quote unquote, solved is this area of the game? Is there a point where you say, okay, I have these 4 crew, I'm set, and I'm going to go on and work on other parts of the game?
I mean, really, it's about that simple. You can only put 4 crew on a ship, and as Denjamin already said, they really haven't seen any reason to push the envelope beyond 6 second 400% damage, apart from uh, no limit on the number of shots that it can do, and then the crit boost, I think plus 18,000 is the top end that they've decided to do with any of that, and then plus 10 damage, maybe plus 11 with some kind of trigger. Other than that, if you've got one of each of those and probably 2 400% damage crew, I don't really see how you can do any better than that. And once you've got that and you're all set on that, move on to other things.
All right, and we're going to move on to my personal favorite part of the game, collections. Now, if you're a big Pokemon fan, this is going to be your chance to shine. Timelines has dozens of different collections. Most of them are trait-based, and they've been adding more for years. So I would expect to see this probably until the game dies. Rest in peace. Beyond a sense of pride and accomplishment, TM, you also get permanent stat boosts here by completing milestones for most of these collections, and they affect every part of the game, these global stat boosts, Voyages, Gauntlet, Shuttles, events, etc. Now, my motto for years now has been hashtag follow the traits, and WRG seems to continue to develop new game modes based around traits, so it just makes sense to seek out crew who have big, meaty trait lists. Now, I do have to shield BigBook.app's collection page for this greatly detailed information on the topic, but in general, in a big picture view, Dan, how do you handle evaluating traits for collections, and which traits might be more valuable than others?
Yeah, I like traits that are kind of mid-sized. If you got a specific trait that is a racial trait, maybe very underrepresented, it's never going to get made into a collection. And likewise, some traits are just so huge, you're never going to see a collection for your human, your Federation, your Starfleet. It's just not going to happen. So the sweet spot's right in the middle, and they've done some extremely small collections, but generally speaking, if you've got maybe 10 or a dozen crew or more, then you're good to go, and it's pretty safe. I've got faith in the traits, for a stats-based game with dozens of number crunching spreadsheets and websites, it's easy to think of traits as intangibles. So let's say you're putting together your fantasy sports team. It doesn't really help you if your quarterback is romantic. For a long time, these traits weren't even really particularly relevant in timelines, but they've had consistent value in Voyage. Uh, Initially, some away missions, we mentioned the cadet missions earlier, they'll need strange combinations. I've seen one node that I had to unlock with a diplomat that had high security that was difficult. But once you've achieved that, you've 3-starred it, you get to warp it, you never need to worry about it again. More recently, traits have changed in a big way, and I believe they're only going to become more relevant. You got to keep an eye on your collection tiers, so that should be routine whenever you have a behold or retrieval choice. See how close you are, and if you can make a high value choice that also completes one of those stat boosting tiers, you're not only improving that individual crew, but your entire roster. Those little 1% boosts may seem to be insignificant, but consider the power that 1% has when you apply it to your entire Voyage of 12 crew. Let's say you're crafting hundreds, even more than 1,000 galaxy recipes all afternoon. Those little edges are going to add up. Speaking of events, a galaxy event, these collection buffs are one of the last great gulfs that a new player must cross to even the odds against other endgame players. Any competitor will tell you that those edges count. Gamblers will tell you that. Having better stats to produce more super rare items for turn-in Galaxy, or to have more shuttle successes, they're going to pay dividends. You're going to reach higher event finishes, get better winnings. Even in Gauntlet, in lower stakes Gauntlet matchups, you have stat boosting collections to improve your proficiencies. And over time, those are going to give you those small edges that'll add up to more win streaks and more exclusive crew. Fleet boss battles have changed the way that we look at traits a lot. They've brought them to the forefront. with Fleet Boss Battle, you do have to worry about your ship battle crew, but more importantly, to do huge damage to the bosses, you need to have a fantastic spread, a really deep roster, full of all different combinations of traits. Maybe not in the lower boss levels, but certainly when you get to the highest levels of boss battle, the Ultra Nightmare in particular, you're going to knock hundreds of millions of damage off of that boss, and you're going to want to do that with as few Valor as possible, which means solving nodes with your roster full of trait-rich crew. You're going to get also drops from improving your bridge along the way, so it's important to do this to get those gold citations for free. High-value crew. I think every fleet should be coordinating to maximize their strategy and centering that around their traits.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get this out of the way now. The thorn in my side, the big base, as it's called. So, Big, you're going to be my guy for this one. I'm referring to daily and event shuttles. Now, when the game launched, there was no Gauntlet, there were no Voyages, there was no Skirmish event, and so proficiencies are really only useful for clearing nodes on the galaxy map. So it seems that a lot of these sort of old school traditional ways of valuing crew have been hard to shake. Now, I've seen a lot of schools of thought about where you want to focus your roster building attention. Some say chase that big base and Voyages will take care of themselves. On the other hand, I've seen players completely ignore shuttle crew and still be flush with bonus options for their faction events and be fine there regardless. So this is really one of those questions that you'll have to answer for yourself. And it is great to have agency over how you construct a roster, but I think in modern timelines, placing a premium value on shuttle crew seems unwise. Not only does shuttle success chance have a diminishing return applied, meaning every point of base you add gives you a smaller increase in success rate than the previous point, but they also have a hard success cap at 99%, while systems like Voyages and Gauntlet theoretically can scale to infinity. We've seen 10-hour Voyages become 12 and then 13 and then 14. Now, Big, am I blaspheming here against the state, or should this become more the new default for crew evaluation, a lesser value placed on bases, especially if you're not regularly pushing hard in faction events?
Yeah, I think bases are for events and for faction events almost exclusively, because it's the only shuttles are the only game mode that doesn't take anything else into account other than bases. So while that's important, and we'll talk a little bit more about events later, it can't be the be all and end all of your crew evaluation. And really, like you say, it's not even should be a primary concern. Bases will take care of themselves as you progress. A lot of the top Voyagers, they're going to have sufficient or even elite bases. And now they've started adding exclusive crew that are high base crew as a Gauntlet reward. So if you want to get any of that, you still need to bump up your Gauntlet crew so you can compete for those crew too. I think, bases have their place, but they are by no means the number one thing you should be looking for when you're evaluating crew.
All right, one last area where that old school philosophy comes in is the phrase add the star in Beholds. Now again, the game didn't launch with honor sales or citations or crew retrieval. If you wanted to get your gold crew fused fully, you had to take them when you saw them in Beholds. But this is a vastly different game now. There are regular honor sales and ways to target acquire almost every crew in the game. Now adding the star is fine and even preferable when all your Behold choices are equivalent, but if you have a top-notch crew sitting there, or one that's rated a few tiers or cab points higher than the crew you have a star on, I think it's smart to take the better crew. Adding the star, quote-unquote, means you're saving a month or two of citations up front to finish a crew instead of taking a better crew who may last for 6 months, 12 months, sometimes years longer in active use on your roster. You're essentially getting yourself stuck on the treadmill. Now, I often see crew slots being used as part of that equation too. Someone doesn't want to take a good legendary crew because they use a crew slot, but that's really the only function the crew slots have, is to hold your crew. If you're not using them to house usable crew of the top rarity, I think you're kind of missing the mark. There are always crew who can be airlocked or frozen, usually lower rarity crew, in place of a legendary crew who would get active use. Now, Dan, I know you disagree with me here, so as you take the floor, help me find a little bit of common ground. How much better, roughly, would you say a new crew has to be for you to change course and pass on adding stars to a crew that you already have? Is there a certain power level where a crew is going to be always an automatic Behold choice for you?
They'd have to be fairly unique to my roster. I think among the later losers, level of power is fine to start a new project. But you'd still need to consider, again, value over replacement. A massive skill total and a high V rank can be impressive. It's not always a snap keep in my beholds. If it's in a common skill set, then I've already got a lot of that voyage power on hand. It may be a lower value pick for me despite a high ranking. So yeah, the decision is unique for each player. Everything we've discussed today factors into it. Otto, your question though about always taking the star, it does speak to conservation of roster space. This is a struggle for most players now more than ever. The portal has bloated to over 1,000 unique characters, vast majority of them being difficult to finish purple and gold crew. There's also a tension with boss battles that reward you from keeping crew unfrozen or spending merits to rotate them in and out of your cryo freezer. So the actual discussion might be, what's the value in airlocking a crew to make space for a unique, powerful new crew? You may not need to do it now or next week, but at some point, mid-game players are going to run into a space issue. It's going to happen multiple times until you get over the hump of having frozen more purples than you need to collect in the portal. And there's always the march of time. There's always new crew being minted, and that's going to work against your roster space. So I think there is a lot of wisdom in taking the star if it's a toss-up. Often, yes, most new cards would be worth more than the worst single star card you own that would be airlocked. But whoever you choose to airlock is going to come around in the future, and you'll have to make the decision again. So if you're in it for the long haul, I do believe the incremental value of making progress on even mid to low value crew can typically win out over kicking your roster space issues down the line.
All right, Big, why don't you hop in on this discussion? Adding the star, I know that's more of an old school mentality, but there's also, on the other end, people say, oh, you're too elitist, you can't collect every crew in the game. So is there a happy medium where we're looking at acquiring good crew without too much sticking on the treadmill of old crew?
Yeah, I tend to, well, it seems like we've seen a philosophy shift on WRG's part as far as the power level, the power creep, as people like to call it, to where the newer crew that are being released are stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, to the point that a lot of these legacy crew, even if you have 2-3 stars on them, are just getting left in the dust, and you'd be better off taking that first star on some of these newer crew than you are finishing off old crew, except as, collection fodder, which that's not nothing. There are some big collections with some really bad crew in them, and you're going to have to finish some of them eventually to make that. But that's an end game problem. As a new player, I think you want to get the best crew that you can get basically at any time. And if that means sacrificing some weak sauce, 2 skilled gold crew because you just don't have any other options for something to kick off of your roster, chances are you will. But if it's a top 10, top 20 Voyager, or it's a crew with, big proficiency rolls and a bunch of 45% crit sets over just some very old crew with not a lot going for it, I'm going to go for the new crew, and I'm not going to feel bad about it.
Now, if you thought that last topic was hard to objectify, buckle up, because as we've saved the best for last. It's the cool factor with the sunglasses emoji. Now, no one can quantify this, of course, but the point is, if you expect to play this game for the long term, you have to be enjoying it. So sometimes the crew that you love, the one that you've been hoping will be released for a long time, isn't the best. Does that mean that you have to stick to the tier number or the cab number? No, of course not. So, guys, I put you on the spot here, and give me some anecdotes from your favorite personal crew who you have on your roster that your head said, don't do this, but your gut said, I have to because I love Star Trek.
Yeah, so I love the Doctor. I'm not the biggest Voyager fan, but I'm a huge Robert Picardo fan. And so when Virtuoso Doctor appeared in one of my beholds, I had to get him, and he went immediately on my bridge, so I have him shown off. As a matter of fact, he's conducting the orchestra. I've got Cellist Adira and Juliana Tainer next to him, all doing their thing. So maybe not objectively the best choice. He's a fine crew, but I just love the heck out of him. So he's he's always doing it for me.
Okay, one of the most preposterous crew. It's not terrible by any means, but has some of the most ridiculous art in the game, and is someone. And when his event came out, one of my very dear friends who might be talking on this very podcast right now, won the event for, was Little Boy Blue Wesley, which is like you say, if you look at the art for that crew, it's ridiculous. But I had to have him. So when he showed up in a Behold, I took him without even thinking about it. I don't even remember who the other crew in the Behold were, but had to have that, and then had to immortalize him. And when all things are equal, or maybe if there are better options in like a Voyage or something like that, I'll still send him just because I love that card so much.
All right, so that's been our attempt at condensing the somewhat nebulous science of crew evaluation into a half-hour shot. Of course, there are many great player-run resources out there to take a lot of the stats work out of it for you, but we hope that this gives you a handle on how to manage that part of your game. In Part 3 of this New Players series, we're going to cover weekly events and how to succeed there without feeling the need to spend premium or real-life currency. Thanks for listening.